power at the state level through storytelling, organizing, and civic action. We often partner with HCC and Poverty Action and other awesome partners across the state. So just happy to have been invited into this space today, and I'll let the other facilitators introduce themselves before we ask the participants to.
I will jump in. I'm Mallory Van Abema. I work with the Housing Development Consortium of Seattle-King County. I use she, her pronouns. I'm on the policy team there, so I work as the policy and advocacy manager, and I am so pleased to be here today with Poverty Action and RAP, and you all, and thank you so much for taking time out of your Friday afternoon to be here with us.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm Scalzo. I use she, her pronouns, and I also work at HDC. And I've been at HDC for almost a year now, but before this, I worked at the Washington Bus, registering young people to vote and getting young people involved in politics. So it's like my two worlds coming together in a really cool way. So, and I'm in Legislative District, Karina, help me out, I forget.
36.
36.
Oh, and it's me. Hey everyone, I'm Karina, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm at the Statewide Poverty Action Network as the community organizer. And we're also a statewide network of advocates and community members that are working for a Washington free of poverty. We work on many different campaigns that impact very low-income people, and really work to bring up the voices of those people to the table when we're creating our policies in Washington.
Cool. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen for the participant introductions. I think since we're a smaller group, we don't need to break out into small groups, but I'd love to just hear from you all. So if we could, if you'd like to just say your name, pronouns, your organization, and affiliation if applicable, if you'd like. I'm also curious, just how long have you been working / advocating in affordable housing? And if you know, what legislative district are you in? I forgot to mention that myself. I'm in the 26th legislative district. I actually live in Bremerton, Washington, but I used to be a 46er. So I'll pop those questions into the chat, and then I think I will just, whoever wants to jump in first.
I am Karina O'Malley. I'm with Lake Washington United Methodist Church Safe Parking Program. I use she, her pronouns. I went on my first Housing Now March in 1987. I took some years off, but I've been sort of in it since Reagan was driving us crazy. And I am in the 48th.
Thank you.
Hey y'all, this is Liz Mills. I am a longtime resident of the 43rd District, have the dream team there, Representatives Macri and Chop and Senator Pedersen. And I've been involved in human services with a focus on affordable housing probably since the early 90s. And she, her.
Hi, I'm Mary. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm with the Washington Housing Alliance with Kiki. And I just started this position a month ago, so that's how long I've been in housing advocacy, and I'm also in the 43rd District.
Cool. Hey, Mary.
I'm Linda Macer. I currently work at Solid Ground. I've been doing housing advocacy for, I don't know how long, probably since the early 2000, I'm not sure. I'm in the 34th District and constantly trying to encourage people to get involved in advocacy, and not always very successful.
Great.
Hi, I'm Mike Greenberg. Sorry, my video camera doesn't seem to be working. It's coming up super dark. but hopefully you can all hear me. Anyway, I am with Community Frameworks. We're an affordable housing developer and lender with an office in Spokane and another office in Bremerton. I live in Seattle. I'm in the 34th district. I've been doing this work for about 11 years now with Community Frameworks for pretty much that entire time. So I've been in AmeriCorps Vista and then worked my way up. I primarily focus on communications, a little bit of operations, and coordinating with our board and management team. And I use he, him pronouns. I think I answered everything.
Thank you. I think that leaves Rebecca.
Hey folks, sorry there, I'm extra multitasking in this moment. My name's Rebecca, I'm in the 43rd. My pronouns are she, her. I am been doing advocacy and community organizing for about 3 years now. I'm really passionate around like anything that's anti-poverty, and I recognize that that includes housing. Currently, I am doing volunteer work with many of our unhoused community members up at Cal Anderson and Miller Park through multiple mutual aid groups led by community.
Thank you. Real quick, Linda, did you say you were in the 34th district? If you're talking, you are muted.
Sorry, I can't ever figure out the mute.
Okay.
Mute. It's different in every program I'm on. Yes, I'm in 34, and I've been here for years.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Cool. Well, thank you all so much. I just, wow, there's like decades of advocacy and organizing experience just in this intimate group. So that's pretty rad. I'm also very curious to follow up with any of you who work directly with residents of affordable housing. So just earmarking that for later in case I, forget. But thank you for that. I'm gonna pull the presentation back up. There we go. All right, and I'm actually going to hand it over to Mallory, talk a little bit about why we're here for Affordable Housing Week.
Thanks, Kiki. So this is actually HDC's 5th Affordable Housing Week, and as you all have and we all have collectively adjusted to very unusual circumstances due to COVID-19, we've changed a lot. And this year was fully virtual. We did have a community-based scavenger hunt, which is still going. So please check it out on our website. It's kind of encouraging folks to get outside and better understand the zoning conditions and affordable housing conditions in their neighborhood. Usually this is, events packed into a week, a lot of like storming council chambers, a lot of action, a lot of collective action. So it's been interesting to shift everything to mostly Zoom. There's definitely pros and cons to all of that, but Affordable Housing Week is centered on building a better, community-wide understanding of the current need for affordable homes and how to advocate, how to exert, your rights and your pressure on, or your right to pressure your elected officials to be responsive to the really serious need for affordable housing that we have in this region and really across the nation. So this year, it just so happens that we've got the general election in a few weeks, and we know that federally there has been incredible disinvestment in affordable housing for many, many decades, and a lot of shift to alternative ways of approaching the housing crisis and housing scarcity that are not meeting our current need. So we wanted to end the week with something that was centered on engaging voters, on getting people excited to fill out their ballots, and also getting folks information about certain issues that they can vote on, and certain candidates, which we're a nonpartisan organization, of course, because we're 501c3, so we have to toe a really careful line of being nonpartisan, but we have absolutely are empowered to recommend certain positions on initiatives and other things on your ballot that are not partisan related. So we're going to provide a little bit of background on some of the candidates that you might see on a King County ballot, and then an overview also of the different charter amendments and initiatives that you could potentially be seeing on your ballot. I know not everybody's received theirs yet. They went out, I think, Wednesday. So if they're not in the mail by Monday, I think we're going to go over what you should be doing in a couple slides. But that's pretty much it. We're really excited to be partnering with Poverty Action and with RAP. I'm a member of RAP and have a lot of strong feelings of love for Poverty Action and all the work that they do. So thanks so much for being here. And I think that that is all I have to say today.
Awesome. Thank you, Mallory. All right, so before we dive into the ballot, we're just gonna briefly overview some voting practices and basics in Washington. So in this section, we'll cover some basics and how to register and how to turn your ballots in. So we will cover, if you haven't gotten your ballot by Monday, how to do that. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to provide some brief background on voter suppression and voting in King County specifically. And I just want to shout out Poverty Action for providing this information to us. So to start off, geography really represents power, and in a lot of ways, it's a snapshot of shifting definitions and that shifting power. So Seattle circa 1900, and this particular image is actually from 1936. We'll talk a little bit more about it here in a second, but the first thing you'll notice is that the territory above 85th Street is not pictured in the map. And also parts of Ballard and Greenwood specifically are not actually a part of the city until 1910. After that, Seattle expanded a lot of its boundaries, which went on to impact the electorate. This is a map of redline Seattle in 1936. So typically in Seattle and in some other parts of the state, we've had some issues with redistricting and gerrymandering that we still see the seeds of and the flowers of in today, in not just voting, but in a number of issue areas. In large part, this has been because of the majority white city, county, state population. That doesn't mean that they were all white folks, but just that there was a majority of white folks who had the power in drawing these districts up. The way boundaries have been drawn have to do in large part with times when there were large influxes of communities of color. So this is intentional residential redlining that went on and continues on for most of the 20th century that split up communities of color so they didn't have as much power at the ballot box and in other ways. So when we get to the 1950s and Seattle is annexed the north part, a large part of that happened because of the large influx of African Americans specifically in that area after World War II and other measures that went on to increase the Asian population as well. It's also worth noting that Indigenous Seattleites who have been here from the beginning were also gerrymandered and split up. So these areas were split up to prevent, like I said, these communities from having power, from having a majority in these neighborhoods at the ballot box. So everything we know of Seattle north of 85th Street up to 145th Street was not incorporated until the 1950s. This is just a brief overview of the 1968 election. I think it does provide some lessons learned, especially for 2020 elections. So just quickly, this is a time when civil rights was very dominant in the conversation. Police accountability and other key issues were central in the discussion, not just in King County, but in the United States. And as you know, we also saw widespread protests against the Vietnam War. In King County, we saw ballot initiatives for the first time regarding building a light rail system. So would King County remain predominantly automobile driven, or would there be measures in place to for things like the light rail? So in a lot of ways, these questions, I'm sure you're thinking the same thing, are still asked and still relevant to today's electoral discussion. This picture right here, the black and white photo, is of George Wallace, and next to him you'll see Richard Nixon. Both of these folks, these politicians, were segregationists in their platforms. If you can't tell by the image of Wallace, he was very clearly and explicitly a segregationist, and with Nixon, as you may know, he used a lot more coded language. So he used things in his platform such as law and order, which we hear echoed today with the Trump administration and other administrations. Really, these terms we're familiar with today, but they have a long history. So underneath, you'll see this graph right here. What this is saying is, both Wallace and Nixon were pretty highly favored, at least their platforms were, in King County in 1968. 46% were for Nixon, Nixon's platforms, and an additional 6.5% agreed with Wallace's more explicit segregationist platforms. So what this tells us is when segregation was on the menu, the majority white voters in King County, particularly as a result of how the districts were split up, gerrymandering and whatnot, were in favor of that. So lessons learned from this 1968 election cycle, how do we want to be remembered 40 years from now, looking back at 2020? My assumption is we don't want to be remembered how we're talking about this 1968 election, but also what this does underscore. And there are some other things that I didn't include in this PowerPoint, but are also worth noting, just in terms of how, like, the majority white population most recently ended up voting for Durkin when that was not, Mayor Durkin, when that was not a shared majority in the other predominantly community of color districts that had been split, or communities, I should say, that had been split up. So what this underscores is why it's so important that we engage voters, mobilize and register voters, especially those who have been historically and continually to this day marginalized and really disproportionately impacted by these voting policies in the county. Switching gears a little bit, this just provides a timeline of voting practices as it relates in Washington state. So the voting age changed in 1971 from age 21 to 18. This also was a large effort that I think outcome of the protest and the feelings around the Vietnam War. If people felt that if they could be drafted for the war and could go to war, that they should also be able to decide who would represent them at the home front. In 1983, we got vote by mail elections, but these were specifically for special elections that were allowed to be conducted by mail. 1991, absentee ballots. Voters could apply for a status as an absentee ballot on an ongoing basis. So starting that year, with this option, ballots for every election were sent to those voters through the mail. And then 14 years later, 15 years ago this year, Washington had our vote by mail option became a law just across the board. I think this just is relevant to bring up as there's a lot of discussion at the national level and skepticism about vote by mail. Not to say that Washington has gotten it perfect or that we do it perfectly, but just to say that vote by mail has actually been around in our state for about 15 years. It's not newer in our state. So there have been some recent legislative victories for voting in our state and in the United States, in large part to offset some of the suppression that we noted earlier on. So automatic voter registration for enhanced driver's license became available in 2018. So unless someone opted out when they applied for their enhanced driver's license, they would automatically be enrolled as a voter. Voter registration deadline extension to 8 days before the election. So that's for online and paper voting specifically. And related to that is same-day in-person voter registration for anyone who did not register prior to 8 days. So we'll tell you what specific dates those are in a couple slides. That actually became law in 2018. And so pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds starting on July 1st, 2019. Just as it sounds, 16 and 17-year-olds who were interested in getting pre-registered could do so online, in person, by mail, or at the Department of Licensing. Also in 2019, prepaid postage. So all ballots across the state were could be returned without a stamp. So that means that was huge. Stamps might be like a small cost for some folks, but it could also be a large barrier for others. I just know, like, if you had your ballot and you were ready to submit it and then you forgot your stamps, then, you know, and it's the last day, like that could be the make or break, right? And then the Native American Voting Rights Act allows Native American voters to use non-traditional addresses or the address of a designated building on the nation's land to register to vote. I think just as a reminder, it's important to note that a lot of tribal land, or most tribal land, that is federal, not state. And so a lot of state laws don't just automatically apply to those folks. And so this was an intention of making it more accessible and creating less barriers for Native Americans to have their votes counted when they were non-traditional addresses. And then the last slide on our recent legislative victories for voting. So voting rights notifications for people with felony convictions. We will talk more in depth about felony rights for voting, but just briefly, the Department of Corrections was required in 2019 to start notifying people of the process and path to restore their right to vote before they were released from prison. You know, if you work with folks who have a previous felony conviction, if you're someone that has that yourself, you're probably familiar with the enormous amount of misinformation and confusion that surrounds it. You know, each state has different laws on writing. It's not enshrined in the Constitution to have the vote to write. And because of that, each state has different policy as it relates to people with felony convictions. I think that adds to the confusion, but just to note. And then lastly, ending prison gerrymandering requires the state, the Department of Corrections and DSHS to supply the Redistricting Commission with information of an inmate's last known address so that they can be counted in their hometown, you know, rather than that town that incarcerates them. So I'm gonna stop talking at y'all for a little bit and ask us just to spend the next few minutes, like we'll start with 3, but I'll check in and see if we need more, just to reflect on this question. You can reflect silently to yourself. I'll put some chill music on in the background, but I will ask for some folks to share out on that. So if you're an introvert, just a heads up on that. How do you feel like, with all this information, how is voting and voter suppression related to affordable housing and homelessness? So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a second while we do this. But yeah, we'll just take a few moments now to reflect on that question. We'll turn the music on. finish up your thoughts. And yeah, I'd love to hear from at least one person, maybe two people on this question. How is voting and voter suppression related to affordable housing and homelessness? Feel free to bring in other information that you know from your organizing and advocacy work as well.
This is Mallory. I think that folks who are experiencing homelessness or previously were don't typically have a clear path to get their ballot, to be adequately registered, to submit their vote. I don't think we make it as clear as we could. And I think that that is in its own way kind of an act of suppression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just don't think that we lay out the way, like Secretary of State level, at least. It's difficult to get that information, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree with what Mallory said. I think in terms of like folks that are like vulnerable to voter suppression in Washington State, I think a lot about like people who are experiencing housing instability, because something I used to say at the bus was like, if you didn't get your ballot, did the election even happen? Because most like kind of get their voting materials as like a cue of like, oh, I should be looking around and looking into that. And if you don't receive your materials, I wouldn't imagine knowing about election otherwise. So that's my opinion.
I wonder about sometimes the pushback against affordable housing about locating properties in areas is that there's going to be a high density of people who might vote differently than the other folks in the neighborhood. And there's a real fear of losing control, of losing that political power.
Exactly right. Right. Yeah, a lot of, these, it would seem that a lot of these policies, whether that be redistricting, gerrymandering, like trying to prevent multifamily tax credit buildings or other types of buildings that, source of income discrimination. All right, thanks, Karina. Other Karina. Would kind of lead to a similar voter suppression. So yeah, thank you. If you didn't get a chance to add your thoughts to this conversation, if you could, you're welcome to use the chat to add your thoughts as well. I'm gonna reshare my screen again. And we're gonna transition a little bit now to talking just on the logistics. This is important. Even if you're already registered to vote, we're gonna review some of these things because it sounds like a lot of you are having conversations with people in your community about that who might not know, like what Mallory said, the path to voting is. Overview, just eligibility to register to vote in Washington. You must be a citizen of the United States, a legal resident of Washington State, at least 18 years old by election day, not disqualified from voting due to court order, and not under the Department of Corrections supervision for a Washington felony conviction. So, the formatting got wrong, sorry. Felonies and voting rights. So if you were convicted, or if you know someone who was convicted of a felony in Washington State, your right to vote is restored as long as you are not under the authority of the Department of Corrections. That does include, like, you are not required to have all your fines and fees paid off. It's just you must not be currently in prison or on community custody of the DOC. Once your right is restored, you must re-register to vote. So that's where a lot of the education comes in, is reminding folks that this is a right that they have. Once they're out of prison, they are able to vote and to re-register to vote. If you were convicted of a felony in another state or in the federal court, your right to vote is also restored as long as you're not currently incarcerated for that felony. You do not lose the right to vote for a misdemeanor conviction or a conviction in juvenile court. And we did just put the Department of Corrections phone number if you know someone who has specific questions about their status before registering to vote. Voting while houseless. So even though we're a vote by mail state, you are not required to be housed to vote. I think this was a big thing. Even when I was unstably housed, I was like, oh, we're a vote by mail state, because I was a young adult as well. And I just wasn't sure. My assumption was, oh, I need to have a home in order to vote if we're a mail-in state. That's not the case. So folks will just need to have two things. So first, they should use, when the registration asks for their mailing address, that can be anywhere that person gets their mail. So even if that's like a navigation center or a shelter, their friend's house, their grandma's house, as long as they've gotten the okay to get their mail there and are receiving mail there, they can use that address. Now for the section of the form that asks for their residential address, it doesn't have to be like a street address or anything like that. It could even just be a crossroads. That's where the person is literally staying at night. And with that, they would be registered to vote. There are 3 ways to register to vote in our state. And we can send this PowerPoint out to all of y'all afterwards and to the other folks who are registered for Affordable Housing Week, just to make sure you have the links in this slide and the other resources we'll share. But you can register online, and that is, you have to do that before 8 days before the election, and that's October 26th this year. You can also register by mail, but that has to be received by October 26th, 8 days before the election. We did include a link here where you can print in different languages, and you can also request different language registration forms from your elections office. And you can also register in person, like we mentioned earlier, up until Election Day, which is November 3rd. Oops. Wants to click that in. How to get your ballot. So like Mallory mentioned earlier, ballots were mailed out on Wednesdays. Some folks have already received them. Some folks it might be in your mailbox right now. It might come tomorrow. But if you haven't gotten it by the end of day on Monday, you should probably be thinking about how to get a replacement ballot or calling your elections office to ask what happened. So everyone in our state who is registered will automatically receive their ballot by mail, and it should be 3 weeks before the election. That's today, which is really weird to say that we're already 3 weeks away from the election. But you can actually print your replacement ballot online if you did not receive your ballot in time. This is something I actually had to do for the primaries because I had just moved from Seattle to Bremerton. And so I had updated my address, but it still just somehow got lost in the mail. And so it was just super easy for me to print this out and be able to mail my ballot in. I just dropped my ballot off at the ballot drop box because I was kind of waiting till the last minute, but just a heads up on that. But if you don't have a printer, if you don't know someone with a printer, you can also call and request a replacement ballot either over the phone or in person. You know, I'm just personally encouraging folks not to try and not have to go anywhere in person just because of COVID-19. So if you have other options, you know, I would just gently encourage you to use those other options to prevent large crowds at our elections offices for the people who don't have access to things like printers and whatnot. And on that note, you know, just as important as registering and getting your ballot, like that's great, but it's also just as important to make a plan to vote. So from scheduling a stop at the ballot box to finding time to research candidates or attending a ballot party just like this, voting can present its challenges. And so that's why it's important to make a plan to vote. There is a resource here, plantovote.org, where you can learn more about that. but let's just open it up for discussion now. And here, like, what's your plan to vote? So yeah, I'll call you out. Mary, what is your plan to vote this year?
Thanks, Kiki. I actually just got my ballot in the mail today, so have it open right in front of me, ready to vote, and probably going to drop it off at the nearest ballot drop box, which I'll look up when I'm done.
Great. What about you, Linda? If you're talking, you're on mute, just a heads up.
I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of doing other things too.
No worries.
But what I expected you to be talking about isn't what you're talking about, so.
Oh, so sorry about that. Okay. Well, no worries about that. Rebecca, do you have a plan to vote that you'd like to share with us?
Ooh, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. All the multitasking is happening. I got my ballot last night. It was actually filling it out, watching the vice presidential town hall situation, and talking with my mom about strategy. So yeah, I'm good to go.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. We're going to move on now to what I will assume, I shouldn't assume, but what the other goal of our time today is our ballot party. So I'm actually not going to share my screen for this. This is a time where we're just going to be having a conversation about the ballot, and I'm just going to hand it over to Karina.
Everyone. So I heard that a couple of you have your ballots on hand already. That's really great. I don't have mine, so I have a cool sample ballot here. We're just going to be going right through all of these portions on the ballot. It very clearly shows where you're going to be starting, and that's where we're going to be looking, and then just moving through some of the ballot measures and then some of the candidates as well. Today I'm only going to be covering a couple of candidates, so most of our just local representatives, not the presidential election or any of the court positions. We want to make sure that it's pretty relevant to people that have a direct impact on housing and homelessness issues. So that's kind of who we're going to be covering. But I think Mallory is going to take us through some of the charter amendments first. That's going to be showing up probably somewhere in the early section or in the middle of your ballot on that first page.
Thanks, Karina. So I'm going to go over Charter Amendments 1 through 7, and then I'm going to speak briefly on King County Proposition number 1. So just a very high-level summary. A lot of these charters aren't things that I like immediately work on, but feel passionately about. So I think we're strongly urging you to look into the Charter for Justice, which is recommending a yes vote on Charter 1 through 7. So Charter 1 is relating to inquests, and so an inquest is a fact-finding procedure. It allows, it occurs following an in-custody death, and this amendment would require an inquest when a death occurs in a King County detention facility, an inquest when an action, a decision, or possible failure to offer appropriate care by a member of law enforcement may have contributed to a person's death, and then for King County to assign an attorney to represent the victim's family in the inquest proceedings. So that's Charter Amendment number 1. Charter Amendment 2 is something that HDC works closely on, and we're a member of the PRO committee. So it's related to the disposition of county-owned property for the purposes of affordable housing. So the county has lots of parcels that they either store utility vehicles on or something like that, where we call it underutilized or surplus land. The state in the 2018 session passed a bill that allowed local and regional governments to either lease the land at a low cost, to donate it outright for affordable housing development, or to transfer ownership or just generally reduce the cost. The charter, I mean, our charter is our constitution essentially in air quotes at the county level. So this charter amendment number 2 is just making the change to make sure that our constitution at the county level is in line with state law. So this is, has 3 tiers of affordability. There's very low from 0 to, I think they say 50% AMI, and then they have 50 to 80, and then they have 80 to 115% of the area median income when I say AMI. So King County Charter 2 is something that HDC is strongly supporting, and we hope that it passes and you'll consider voting yes on that. Land is definitely one of the biggest barriers to cost barriers to affordable housing development locally, and we are hurting quite a lot for affordable homes. So King County Charter Amendment number 3, it's changing the word citizens in the charter to a public, member of the public, or resident. So it's just ensuring that all residents in the county have the same protections, the same rights that are afforded in the charter to any person that's considered officially documented as a citizen. So it's just a language adjustment. Charter Amendment number 4 is on the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight. So this is for subpoena authority. King County voters established the Civilian Office of Law Enforcement Oversight in 2015, and this was to investigate and analyze and conduct instances of the county law enforcement interactions. So at that moment, it looks like they didn't have access to much of the information that they needed to conduct investigations. So this would give the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight power to subpoena witnesses, and it would also allow subpoenaed witnesses, it would access the right to be represented by an attorney. So that's King County Charter Amendment number 4, and that's related to subpoena authority. Charter Amendment number 5, I'm just gonna check the chat box if I'm going really, really fast. Okay, thanks Karina for sharing that. And a lot of the language that I'm reading right now is directly from that Charter for Justice. Please click that link if you're interested. You can see all the people that have endorsed this individually, local elected officials, and if you're interested, you can endorse also. Charter Amendment number 5 is making the King County Sheriff an appointed position rather than an elected position. So this has been a discussion for many, many years. It's an opportunity to allow some prompt accountability rather than waiting years for another election and hoping that there's a qualified, an alternative candidate who's qualified. So it's just shifting from making the county sheriff an elected position to an appointed position, which the King County exec would, I think, initially propose a candidate, and then they would go through a vetting procedure where there'd be public comment allowed. Charter Amendment number 6 is about structures and duties of the Department of Public Safety. So this is going to remove, it intends to remove language from the 96 Republican amendment that prevents alteration of the sheriff's office duties. It enables King County to explore more effective public safety that's rooted in community-based alternatives rather than that traditional mainstream, criminal legal system. And then Charter number 7 is prohibiting discrimination on the basis of family caregiver, military, or veteran status. So this is just adding anti-discrimination protections for home caregivers, for veterans, and those that have been discharged, including those that have been discharged on account of sexual preference or identity. So it's just an anti-discrimination prohibition. And then finally, I know that was real quick, finally the other item that I just wanted to briefly speak to is King County Proposition number 1, which is related to Harborview Medical Center. It's the health and safety improvement bonds. So this would potentially be using property tax revenue, bonding against it to make significant infrastructure improvements to Harborview's facilities, primarily the Pioneer Square facility. Right now, Harborview has extensive wait lists for medical respite care, and that is typically used by folks that are, insecurely housed or experiencing housing insecurity and need medical care, but they have extensive wait lists. This would increase bed capacity for that service, but it would also make really big structural changes to Harborview's facilities because it is not seismically, the conditions as far as the facility goes need a lot of seismic upgrades and other, modernizations and efficiencies. So that's Proposition number 1. And I would say that, HCC is supporting all these propositions, but we are actively in support of King County Charter number 2. And then all of this. I'm just gonna, blanket statement, HDC is in support of a yes vote on Charter Amendments 1 through 7, and then also King County Proposition number 1. And I think that's all I'm gonna do.
Awesome. And then I also just wanted to get just kind of review. I know that we had folks from a couple different districts on the call, and we've had some folks hop off. I know we're going to be covering 34 and 43. Or were there any other districts that we needed to cover? Just wanted to check.
I've already voted, but I'm in the 32nd district. I don't know if we happen to have ample time, let's focus on the other folks, but if we want to talk about this.
Cool.
I also am going to post this as a recording, so whatever we get time to cover, I think would still be super useful.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Great, yeah. I think I'll go through the districts of the folks that are here first, but if we have time, I'll just go through all the research I have. I also have research on another document that I'm happy to share after the presentation, because that's everything written out, which can be really helpful. So
34 doesn't really have a difference. Cody and Fitzgibbons are the only two that are on the thing, so I don't think you really have to do 34.
Okay. Sounds good then. Yeah, so we can just jump right into it then. We are going to be skipping to the back of the ballot for most folks. It's going to be skipping over to the congressional candidates for U.S. Congress. Does anyone need a refresher on what who those positions represent for folks in the United States Congress, House of Representatives? I think we probably don't for this group, but generally, our congressional representatives have a portion of the state. They have a larger constituency than our state representatives in our state House and Senate. They also they represent us at the federal level. So these are the folks that make their way over to Washington, D.C. every year, help pass our laws federally. So a little bit different scope and constituency than the state legislative representatives that we'll be covering a little bit later. Okay, so I'll just start going through them. In King County, we have Congress positions for District 1, District 7, District 8, and District 9. Just so we're all clear on what I'm going to be covering here, I'm talking about folks that have an influence on housing and homelessness issues, and I'm also providing information that may not be on their voter pamphlet submission. So I don't know if anyone has that in front of them, but I'm just going to be covering what they do currently as their occupation, what their general priorities are as a candidate, and what background we could find on them surrounding housing and homelessness, and if they have, if there's any clear indication if they have a lived experience of homelessness as well. That's another thing that folks have asked for before. So we're going to go straight into that. So our first candidate for Congressional District 1 as the U.S. representative is Susan Delbene. Susan is the current U.S. representative. Her primary priorities are pandemic recovery and aid. She wants to address child poverty, protect Social Security, Medicare, and reproductive rights. Susan Delbene also has a history of supporting transitional housing with job training and services and securing funding for housing vouchers. She's also for increasing affordable housing supply. And if anyone here has anything to add about any of these representatives, feel free to do so in the chat or unmute yourself. There aren't many of us here. Susan's opponent is Jeffrey Beeler Sr., who is a small business owner. He wants a balanced budget, closed borders and immigration, has a focus on infrastructure, and does not want single-payer healthcare. I could not find any stance on housing on Beeler's website or in the voter pamphlet submission. Moving on to Congressional District 7, we have Pramila Jayapal, who is the current U.S. representative in that district. Her priorities are affordable housing and public transit, debt-free college, healthcare, Social Security, Medicare, reproductive rights, and protecting the environment. Representative Jayapal introduced the Housing as a Human Right Act this year, and that would funnel $200 billion into housing and reducing homelessness across the country, which is a lot of money. Representative Jayapal also believes that homelessness is preventable and that we should secure funding for housing voucher programs. Craig Keller is Jayapal's opponent. He works with earthquake protection devices and investment portfolios for retirees. His main platform issues are mostly about reopening the economy as after COVID-19, and primarily focused on removing all social services for non-citizens. He also wants to require US issued IDs for many things. There's more details on the website for him, but he also does not have any stance on housing or homelessness anywhere on his site or in his voter template submission. So next we have Congressional District 8. The US representative candidate is Kim Schreier there, who is the current US rep and is a former pediatrician. Schreier wants affordable health care, gun safety, protections for the environment and reproductive health, and places a lot of stress on healthcare resources and pandemic recovery. She wants more secure funding for HUD funding and does not have any other stance that I found on her website. However, if anyone has anything else to add there, it may just not be readily available. Same for Jesse Jensen. Didn't find any more information on housing. Jesse Jensen is also a former military member and also works in tech right now. His main platform point is just reopening the economy and wants to support veterans, small businesses, workers, and healthcare. And then the last congressional district that we have in King County is 9. Adam Smith is the current US representative for that district and is hoping to create economic opportunity for working families, protect unions, make higher education affordable, create good paying jobs, provide affordable healthcare and veteran services. Smith's housing platform is pretty extensive on his website. He has a platform of protecting affordable housing, creating protections from predatory lending that lead to foreclosures, spending more on Section 8 housing, raising the minimum wage so that people can afford rent and mortgages, creating a public-private or more public-private partnerships to create affordable housing, and more services for people who are currently unhoused. Smith's opponent, Douglas Michael Basler, is a business executive for a website and does work in media. He wants limited government interference and closed borders and immigration. He also wants to end visa programs for people that are coming to the US. He does not have any stance on housing or homelessness issues. So that is it for our federal congressional representative positions on the ballot. I'm going to move into the state governor. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but there are some offensive things that a couple of people say in some of these pamphlet responses. There is some misinformation in some of them too, since the state is not required to fact check any of the pamphlet submissions. So I just want to give a little notification that there are some things in here that are just, you know, not so great.
Karina, can I really briefly just say something about all work and experience of incumbents that are in the King County region? So everybody that you know, everybody that's a House, a congressperson that is running for re-election, were sponsors of the HEROES Act. So tried to get $100 billion of rental assistance passed back in May, and we're very adamant about the need for rental assistance immediately getting expedited. And we have multiple Congress folks that you just mentioned as well were supporters of like the other side of housing, the development side of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. One of the primary sponsors is someone that you've mentioned that is an incumbent. So there is a lot of clear support for affordable housing, for meeting people's basic needs, and for providing more ample funding for homelessness services that we've experienced. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the distinctions are very clear, where there's a lot of folks who have a lot to say about housing and a lot of folks who say nothing at all. And I think that's pretty, you know, definitely worth noting. So thank you for adding that. So from there, we can move on to the position of governor. That's going to be right after the congressional representatives on your ballot. So for the two candidates for state governor are Jay Inslee, who is our current governor. He's running on a platform of economic recovery, healthcare, education, and especially climate and clean energy. Inslee has the highest amount of donations in this race. He has several $1 million that are coming from individual contributions to the Democratic Party, and a lot of money coming from businesses, PACs, and labor unions. There's no specific information on housing issues on his website, but I think we know that with the recent extensions to the eviction moratorium and throughout this pandemic and Inslee's past few years, his focus shifting more to housing has been pretty apparent. If anyone would like to speak to that more with specifics, I'm fairly new to Washington, so I don't have all of those in my recent memory, but there's definitely more out there on Jay Inslee. For Lauren Culp, the competitor, Lauren Culp is a veteran and former police officer. His platform is about respecting citizens' rights and accountability for state government. He has fewer donations that come mostly from individual donors, and also his platform on homelessness is that he believes it's caused by mental health issues and drug addiction, and disagrees with building housing for people that are currently unhoused. He wants to address the homelessness crisis by arresting people, just a blanket arrests, essentially. So that is pretty clear language that comes from Lauren Culp's website. For Lieutenant Governor, we have two candidates as well. This is the position that is second in line to governor and presides over the state senate. They step in when the governor is out of state as well. So the two candidates for that are Marco Elias, who is a state senator and small business owner. He wants economic recovery for all, universal health care, quality education for all, and more transit opportunities, and better revenue structure. He's supportive of long-term care and supportive housing, and he wants more investment in housing options. He thinks that better tenant protections and keeping people in their homes is going to be really important, and he's raised more than $200,000 for his campaign. I don't know if that, I think that figure is actually no longer accurate, but his opponent, Denny Heck, has raised a lot more money for his campaign, which may speak to some of his donors. Denny Heck is a former congressman who wants better economies, a strong public education system, and better environmental protections, expanded access to healthcare, and progressive tax reform. Heck is responsible for writing the $100 billion rental assistance bill that became part of the HEROES Act, and more affordable housing and tenant protections. Does anyone have anything to add to those two? Or Governor? It's a lot of information too, so thanks y'all for bearing with us. So next is the Secretary of State, who is the Chief Elections Officer, as well as the Chief Corporations Officer and Supervisor of the State Archives. The two candidates for that are Kim Wyman and Gail Tarleton. Kim Wyman is the current Secretary of State and wants to maintain election security. She wants to improve voter registration and turnout, making it easier to conduct business in Washington by streamlining the filing process. There's no specific information on housing from Wyman, but the majority of her contributions are from individuals, large businesses, real estate, property management companies, venture capitalists, and professional associations. Gail Tarleton, who is Wyman's opposition, is a state representative and a security and defense analyst. She's led efforts to expand voter engagement, or wants to lead efforts to expand voter engagement and participation and improve security for elections. There's no specific information on housing here also, but one can kind of, like many of these candidates, you can infer from the way that she's voted in the past and bills she's sponsored, and what her stance is on different policies based on that. And then a lot of her donations have also come from individual donors, with the top donors being Washington State Democrats, different indigenous nations, PACs, and unions. Next on the ballot is the state treasurer, who manages the cash flow, investments, and debt of all major state accounts. The first candidate for that is Dwayne Davidson, who is the current treasurer. He's in support of fully funding the Rainy Day Fund, advising the state legislature on state spending, helping local governments with financing and investment opportunities, and funding financial literacy programs. We also didn't have specific information here on housing, but he did support legislation that created payment plans to address property tax delinquency and prevent foreclosure. The next candidate for treasurer is Mike Pelatradi. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Mike was a former state representative and state auditor. He wants government transparency, better campaign finance transparency, no income taxes, and lowering property taxes. There's no specific information on housing policy here as well. And then the last one that's a statewide position is the Attorney General, who represents state clients and the public interest as directed by state law. The first candidate for that is Matt Larkin, who is an attorney. His platform is around law and order, addressing homelessness and stopping drug use in the streets. He wants to address homelessness by ensuring that law enforcement have the tools, training, and resources necessary to do their jobs. His campaign website says that there's an incredible impact on communities. Sorry, someone put a whole quote on here. I'm not going to read this quote. There is actually not much information here from Matt Larkin. The other candidate running for Attorney General is the current Attorney General, Bob Ferguson. He wants to protect taxpayers, prosecute violent crimes, and protect consumers. He also wants to protect seniors from fraud and the environment. There was no specific information on housing and homelessness, but he did push for legislation to ensure that homeowners had access to payment plans when trying to pay their property taxes, particularly for elderly folks, people with disabilities, and veterans. Were there any questions about some of those statewide positions so far? Or any thoughts that people want to share?
Well, I'll just add that I know the Attorney General, Bob Ferguson's team right now is helping tenants and renters like navigate the eviction moratorium. So they're a pretty good resource for that, in case that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I know I've seen that form kind of just everywhere, and I've actually sent that to folks and like seen people really utilize that when people are in violation of the eviction moratorium. So definitely a really great resource that's come out of their office, and I think they've been pretty speedy to respond to, which is great. Thanks for sharing that. Other things?
One more thing in regards to our current Attorney General, Mr. Ferguson. He and his team did an extensive kind of swath of experiences of folks that were being discriminated against specifically because they were trying to redeem VASH vouchers. So the basically the tenant-based vouchers that veterans are eligible for that provide subsidized rent. And there was quite a lot of discrimination going on. Some of it was explicit, and so they did a very wide swath of the state and uncovered a lot of stuff that they were able to then hold large property owners accountable for. So definitely looking out for folks that are on a modest means, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Looks like somebody else has joined the call too. Do we want to take a moment? Anne, would you like to introduce yourself? Welcome.
Thanks. My name is actually not Anne, it's Karen, but I was using my employer's Zoom account. Evidently has not let go of their other person's name. My name's Karen. So, and I'm coming late. Hey, Mallory.
Hey, Karen.
I'm coming in late. That's a church council name there. So, and that's their office manager, and that's not who's here. It's me.
Well, it's great to hear your voice.
Oh, there you are. Yeah.
Great, and
Oh,
I
hey,
don't know what you've been talking about, but I thought I'd at least show my face and say hello because I'm long week for this topic.
For sure, yeah. We're actually just starting to cover some of the more local races, so looking at people's local state senators and state rep positions. Do you have a district in King County that you want to make sure is covered?
Well, I'm in the 36th legislative district, so.
6, cool. Great, I think we were covering that anyways, too.
Where I can vote at least. I work
Yeah.
in districts, but you got to vote where you live, so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just moved from the 36th as well. I think we were talking about that earlier, but.
I'm in the 36th too.
Yeah.
But I can tell you on a positive note, I'm going to be an election observer this year.
Oh, cool.
So I just got my assignments given to me, so yeah.
COVID is so weird. That's awesome though. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it is weird with COVID. We were trained earlier in the week, and it's going to be weird. There's very few people that are allowed in because the building has to have the workers that are processing the ballots.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have, 100 people in a building, so.
Hope it's a big building.
It is, but they assure us they've changed. The biggest issue is the error exchanges per hour, so hopefully they've fixed that, but.
Yeah. Well, I hope you and the other staff stay safe and all the folks that are coming in to vote.
So I'm late, so go ahead with what you were doing.
Great, thanks, Karen. Cool, so I think we are going to start off with the 34th. I'll flip to the page here. So the first candidate that we're looking at here is for the state rep position 1, and that's Eileen L. Cody, who's running unopposed. Eileen is a nurse and the current state rep and wants to ensure access to quality health care. She also wants to achieve affordable health care, and there's no information regarding affordable housing or homelessness specifically. In the second position for state representative, we have Joe Fitzgibbon, also running unopposed. He's the current state rep in that position as well and wants to fight climate change. He also wants to fight for clean air and clean water, rebuild the West Seattle Bridge, and wants sustainable revenue and budgets. There's also no specific information on housing and homelessness there, unless anyone else has more context. This is just what I'm getting from campaign websites mostly, and the voter pamphlet too.
He is a housing and has supported bills in support of housing. And so is Eileen, but Eileen's main focus is healthcare and health, which of course is very important too.
Yeah, especially being a nurse. Could definitely see that. In the 36th, we have the state representative position 1. Noel Christina Frame is running unopposed in that district. She's my former representative too. Actually, my neighbor. Yeah, that's kind of cool.
She's also a new mom. That's cool.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, I picked up something from her house a couple months ago, which is kind of cool. Yeah, anyways, she's the current state rep and wants to restructure the state's tax code and fight for economic recovery. She also wants better access to housing and wants more of an investment in affordable housing, wants an investment in health and treatment services for people that are unhoused, and to provide permanent prevention programs for people who are on the verge of becoming unhoused. In the second position for state representative in the 36th, we have Liz Berry, who is a PCO. Liz wants to promote equity, wants affordable childcare, universal health care, and housing for all. There was no more information in the voter pamphlet or on her website. And then Sarah Renovold is the other candidate running for that position. She's also a PCO in the district and wants leadership to address public health, housing, and the homelessness crisis. She wants funding for transportation, education, and childcare, and wants to make taxation fairer. She wants to tackle systemic inequalities and combat climate change. She also wants affordable and equitable access to housing for everyone and to end homelessness. So for both of these folks, there wasn't a whole lot of specific information in their platforms. but a general commitment to affordable housing.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, of course.
For folks that are just jumping in, I'm Kiki. I'm with the Resident Action Project at the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. I also just want to mention that the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance does have an action fund, which is a C4. And actually for a couple of the folks mentioned, most recently, Sarah, Renovold, Liz Berry, Noel Frame, they've responded to a questionnaire that our action fund has put out regarding housing. And so I will pop that in the chat, and I just want to be clear that that's a C4, which is endorsements. You don't have to follow it, but it is an opportunity for you to read more from their firsthand perspectives on what they've said are key to their platform for housing. And so there's other folks we've endorsed there too. I think for the 36th district, you've got to scroll down to basically halfway through the page, but I forgot to mention that earlier, so I just wanted to jump in and mention that real quick.
Yeah, that's super helpful too. I didn't know that there was responses specifically from some of those candidates, so that's really cool. Yeah, and I think generally for all of these positions too, for folks that are not incumbents, it can be kind of hard to know their history on ways that they voted or what laws they've been and policies they've been responsible for pushing in the legislature. So it can be really helpful to seek out questionnaires or surveys or endorsements from organizations that are able to take that sort of stance. For many of us that are in the 501c3 status, we can't make endorsements. So those are always really helpful resources, and just knowing your values and what organizations represent them can be a really helpful research tool. So thanks for bringing that up. So moving on to the 43rd, the state rep position 1, Nicole Macri is running. She's the current state representative and wants to protect Washington from the devastating impacts of COVID, to create jobs, expand health coverage, and she wants affordable housing and mental health services, as well as climate action. Representative Macri helps pioneer the Housing First approach and actively informed and influenced national policy to help house the homeless, and wants to expand accessible and affordable housing options that address structural changes and to protect low-income residents and people who are most vulnerable to becoming unhoused. The opponent of Representative Macri is Leslie Klein, who is a veteran. She wants to support the rights of the senior population and to unify people, and she wants a healthy economy. There's no information from her on housing homelessness. And then for the state representative running for position 2, the first candidate is Frank Chop, who is the current state representative and former Speaker of the House. He wants to advance a progressive agenda and provide free college and university tuition for all low-income students by taxing large corporations. He's also mandated 100% clean electricity and reducing carbon emissions. He built rent-restricted housing and wants expanded healthcare to all. So Frank has built partnerships that created thousands of affordable nonprofit homes with over 300 rent-restricted apartment buildings in Seattle. He's also advocated to raise the minimum wage, expand union organizing efforts, and started the campaign. Oh, that's not part of it. So that is some information about Frank Chop, if anyone wants to add to that. He has a very long career here in Seattle, so I'm sure there's a lot more that can be added to this piece about him. Chop's opponent is Sheree Lachelles, who is an entrepreneur and community organizer. They support affordable housing, social justice reform and harm reduction, and community care. They want a fair tax structure and to tax the people that are most wealthy. They believe that housing is a human right and wants universal and accessible healthcare. They want to increase state funding for housing with an emphasis on housing first and homelessness services. They want shelter, healthcare, and harm reduction to be included in that model. And they want to end the practice of homelessness sweeps, especially in Seattle. They also have a lived experience of homelessness themselves. And then, what's this last one? Yeah, I think lastly, we have the 46 that we're covering as well. Sorry. The first position for that district is the state representative position 1. Is it Jerry or Gary Pollitt? I never know. Okay.
Jerry. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, as I said, I'm from California, so fairly new to this work. I've been in this position for a few months. So Jerry Pollitt is running for state rep position 1. Jerry is the current state representative and wants to ensure that COVID response is based on protecting health and that science is emphasized in that response. Wants to make sure that the tax system is more fair and support public schools, and also wants to make college affordable and protect the environment. There was no specific information from him on that, on housing and homelessness, but since he is a current rep, we can also look at his history. And then his opponent is Eric J. Brown, who is a bus driver. He wants to confront those living unlawfully and their failure to empower the homeless. He has a vision of hope and unity. There's no information other than that line there. That's taken from the voter guide. So for state representative position 2, we have Javier Valdez, who's the current state rep. He wants to prioritize the safety of families, rebuild the economy, and has passed bills stiffening penalties on hate crimes. There's no information addressing homelessness or affordable housing on the website or in his voter pamphlet submission. And then there's Beth Duranciang, who is a PCO that is running against Valdez. Beth is a program manager and supports lower taxes, transparency in government, parental rights, and First Amendment freedoms. No specific information on housing and homelessness there as well. And I think those were all of the local positions that we were going to cover for this section. Does anyone want to talk about any of those that we've covered? I know that there's information from the Housing Action Fund that could be helpful here.
I'm personally a little confused on Charter Amendment number 6. I know we kind of like already went over it a while ago, but I was just curious. It seems like the language is kind of like very back and forth, so I don't know if you guys have any good resources to decipher it.
I'm just looking through the Charter for Justice overview.
Oh, right.
I think that it's a little ambiguous. The stuff that stands out to me is that they want to explore more effective public safety methods, based alternatives to our current policing model. And I think it is looking at dated language that clearly outlines the King County Sheriff's Office's duties to look for where adjustments could be made to move to more community driven solutions to justice, essentially.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
I think broadly speaking, charter amendments are so largely focused on like language adjustments. Some of these things are bigger sweeping things like changing the sheriff's office to an appointed position. So that's like an actual structural change that would have implications on the way that we vote locally. But a lot of these items are like Charter Amendment number 3. We just want to make our, our county constitution more inclusive of all the folks that live here by removing the word citizen, by changing that to the public or resident of King County. And the other pieces are just kind of aligning with what state law has already opened up the county to take advantage of and to access, and just slight language changes. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You also mentioned that there were some King County Council members that were associated with Charter for Justice. Was that just for my?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's Councilmember Dembowski, Councilmember Cole Wells, Councilmember Upthegrove, Council Chair Balducci, Councilmember McDermott, and then various other local elected officials are also supportive, and the ACLU, there's like Latino Community Fund, there's a lot of different organizations and elected officials that are endorsing the full 1 through 7 yes vote on all the charter amendments.
Okay.
That's cool. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely have to check out that website some more. Thank you, Linda. Good to hear from you.
Thanks, Linda.
I guess one other question I have is resources for like the Supreme Court. Like, I always feel like I kind of just have to guess at these things, and that there's not a lot of like election materials. I don't know if you all have resources for that.
I've just been using Twitter. It's not the best.
Oh, Twitter, okay.
But I've just been like paying attention to when I hear mention of certain justices or candidates and trying to do a little research that is probably not rooted in the technical research term.
No,
they're nonpartisan, right? They can't be a partisan position. So if you typically vote with one party or another, you can't really just say, I'm going to vote this way.
Yeah.
Essentially vague with language, but there is a little digging on some of them that I was able to uncover from someone's Twitter feed. So
Cool. Okay, well, I'll dive into Twitter as I do every night tonight. So.
I am right there with you, though. The Supreme Court positions are.
It's like very subtle, usually, kind of like.
And so influential. It's really wild.
Totally.
I mean, that wasn't on our ballot in the primary too, so it's like, oh yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Google Scholar. Yes.
Yeah. If you use Google Scholar, can get you access to the legal world that often you have to pay to have access to. It'll give you cases. You can see names of who's decided what. I think one of the biggest problems with judges is people don't take the time to do the research, and because it's a nonpartisan position, they can't really politic. But you can quickly read their decisions if they're in the dissent or if they're in the majority opinion, and you can look up. And Google Scholar will help you kind of see trends. So you can put something in there on homelessness or housing or whatever your interest is, and you can start seeing the cases that pop up. So it's a layperson's resource into the legal arena that is free.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Awesome resource. I hadn't thought of that. Thanks, Karen.
But understand it's Google, so understand it's not a legal resource, and understand there's, I'm sure, an algorithmic bias built into the darn thing. So know that, because algorithms are becoming publicized now. And
I mean, that's probably the case with Twitter though too.
Yeah, well,
there's always going to be a little bit of a skew in what you see. So
yeah, the white male patriarchy is built into all these algorithms. So.
Too true.
Is that everyone? Did we just cover everything, Karina? That was a lot. Thank you for the research.
I know, seriously. I mean, I'm all filled out now, so.
That's great, yeah.
Yes.
There's definitely more districts that we have research on, and like big shout out to our Internet Poverty Action, Maya, who did a lot of this research in partnership with me. So just a lot of information, and we can send the rest of this in case any RAP members or anyone else has other districts that we didn't cover in the recording. So we'll definitely get that.
Will that research be shared?
Yes.
Okay. You may want to think, and you may already have the links to Indivisible, but they're pretty active politically. So if you haven't thought about that, that's a good network to share your research with.
Awesome. Well, we're just about wrapped up. I'm going to share my screen just for some closing out points. Thank you so much, Karina and Mallory. That was so informative. I might have to do some more in-depth research like that for Bremerton too, because I was like, yes, that's really helpful to hear. So yeah, just before we close out, looks like we're going to be giving you all some of your afternoon back. So hopefully you still have your beverage in hand, and if not, you'll have time to get another refresher for your Friday night. you know, if you're not already, oh, I guess I should do presentation now. If you're not already signed up for Housing Development Consortium alerts, you can do so here. I'm not going to read this out loud, but I will pop the links in the chat here in a second. You can also sign up for Statewide Poverty Action Network, as well as the Resident Action Project. So awesome partnering. I always love partnering with y'all, and it was really cool to be here today. I'm just going to do a shameless plug for the Resident Action Project's upcoming event. If you are a nonprofit staff person, if you work with residents of affordable or subsidized housing, we've got a really cool event coming up next month on November 20th and 21st. It's our Summit for Homes. This is where we're going to develop our Resident Action Project organizing strategy for the legislative session around housing and affordable housing priorities at the Housing Alliance. And you can just sign up at bit.ly/Summit for Homes. And with that, you know, thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen just so I can pop in the chat how to sign up for our organizations. And correct me if I'm wrong, but HCC, Emma, you will be able to send out these slides and the recording as well. Cool.
Yeah, and an easy go-to is it's just going to be on our Affordable Housing Week page, but I'll definitely send it out as an email follow-up too.
Great. I did forget to show our resource slide. So lots of resources on here from Poverty Action Network and HDC. Again, I can pop these in the chat and we can make sure that you get these slides. So if you have any other questions, you know, a lot of the links that were sent out in the chat today have been sent out here. So
I do also have a note about our resources that are coming from Poverty Action. In our voter guide this year, it's not all of the districts in the state that we're covering, but we do have all of the congressional districts, some responses directly from those folks. And we also have like a dog whistle glossary, which is really kind of cool. It just kind of points out some common language and what that may mean realistically. So that's in there if you want to check that out. And we also have a ballot box map that you can create borders for Washington counties, Washington legislative districts, and Washington congressional districts. And so you can see all of those borders and just type in your address and find the closest ballot box next to you. It'll show up as just like a little blue pinpoint on the map. And so that's helpful if you want to just drop off your ballot. I know that a lot of folks are nervous about pressure on USPS this year. So if you have the ability to bring your ballot to the ballot box, that's great. And we highly encourage that. Yeah, and the photo op at the ballot box, that's important.
Yes, I always forget to take a picture. I'm not gonna lie, last time I literally voted the morning of, I like dropped my ballot off the morning of election day, but I got it in, okay? This is why I always drop it off at the ballot box.
Yeah, at least you didn't just throw it in the mailbox day of.
Great, cool. Well, that's all I got. Mallory or Emma or Karina, do you have any final thoughts before we send people on their way?
Just thank you all so much. I mean, this whole event speaks for itself. You guys put so much into it, and I think it's all gonna really help like when it comes to filling out your ballot, and I just can't thank you enough.
Yeah, echo that. Thanks so much. Really happy to see familiar faces, and Rebecca, even though I didn't see your face, it's nice to see your name. And Mary, it's nice to meet you on here, and thanks so much for all that extensive research and also laying the groundwork for where we are and how we got here history-wise in our voting in our state. So, Rebecca, are you going to say something?
Yeah, hold on. I'm sorry. Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I am the perpetual doing 4 million things right now. Thank you all for your time today. It was really helpful, particularly around the charter amendments. Just for my understanding, I really appreciate it, and the research and stuff. You guys have been awesome, and I appreciate that y'all are going to be sharing via email the recording and then the slides and stuff. So that's awesome.
Thanks for being here. So nice to hear you.
Yeah, you too, Mallory. Thanks for helping us out.
And I just want to reiterate that this is such an appropriate way to close out Affordable Housing Week because, you know, in years past, we've always done it around more like action steps that you can do to like participate in affordable housing advocacy. And I think what's more appropriate right now than voting and like really thinking about who our elected officials are and, you know, kind of like the folks that are representing us. And I hope folks feel like inspired to take what they've learned over Affordable Housing Week and channel it into the voting process.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Well, thanks all.
Vote early if you can. Vote early if you can.
Don't
Have
forget to
a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.